Today, a look towards the infinite, off the beaten track in Egypt. Most of this country is a desert with many different facets. The people we'll be meeting have chosen to make their lives here in these vast spaces. Mansour is a child of the oasis. At Bahariya, this young veterinarian cares for all the animals of the small farmers. He has become an important personality in the local community. Uil was a civil engineer. He left his job as an architect to become a monk and joined one of the monasteries in the Wadi Natrun Valley that for 16 centuries now have been maintaining the traditions of Christianity and desert monks. Fanuya is a navigator of the sands. For more than 30 years, this Frenchman has been exploring these vast spaces. Traveling the desert with him means setting out to discover magnificent sights.
I never get tired of these landscapes. It's a strange feeling, like going back to the beginning of the world, like you're starting over. I've never met anyone who wasn't moved by the sight of these shifting dunes.
Sahara. In the Arabic language, this word does not mean a region or a territory. It simply means desert. Just as the word ocean doesn't designate a specific body of water. From the banks of the Nile to the shores of the Atlantic, this one desert, under different names, stretches over a large part of northern Africa. It covers 2/3 of Egypt up to the Libyan border. Here it's called the Western Desert, formerly the Libyan Desert, and it's one of the driest deserts in the world. The ancient Egyptians considered this desert an evil kingdom. Yet in the middle of this mineral ocean, a verdant archipelago resists the onslaught of the waves of sand. The 5 oases of the Western Desert are sheltered islands where the miracle of life has triumphed over the hostile climate. Living in an oasis means working the land. Here, farming, trade, and prayer set the rhythm of life. People leave for the fields every morning at the same time. They cultivate the land the same way their ancestors did. The path of life has already been traced for these men and women, and they follow it not out of resignation, but out of respect for tradition.
Is she eating well?
Yes.
Is she eating normally?
Yes.
Is she pregnant?
Yes. 3 months.
At Bawiti in the Bahariya oasis, everyone knows Dr. Mansour. He's from Bahariya himself, and he's the only vet in town. For the farmers raising a few animals here, Mansour is a godsend.
Everybody likes the vet here because they know I'm always ready to help them and their animals. Animals are their livelihood, and people worry as much about the health of their livestock as that of their children. After I finished my studies in Cairo, I tried to work there, but all I got were offers in pharmaceutical companies, and that didn't interest me. In the oasis, everybody has livestock, so there's much more work here. Oddly enough, there are a lot more vets in the suburbs of Cairo than in the oasis. But there's a real human dimension here, and it's not too crowded. I'm the second vet who comes from the oasis. I'm a child of the oasis.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen, all for free. No subscription required.
Oasis.
Herodotus called them islands of the blessed. For more than 8,000 years, these oases have been inhabited, cultivated, preserved. Long isolated, the people of Siwa used to live in a town constructed of mud brick, nicknamed the City of Mud. A series of torrential rainstorms in the heart of the desert brutally transformed the past into a heap of ruins. In the space of 4 years, from 1926 to 1930, the city of Shali was totally devastated. As they had no other place to go, the people of the oasis built another city right next to it. And life goes on, more or less as always.
الو والله المشكله في يعني يا نبدا بكره يا يوم السبت معلش
هاي تعال بص يا دكتور بص الحاله مدي قد ايه
كل 20 يوم
You need to give him a series of injections. That's the best way to treat him. You need to give him 3 doses spread out over several days. I'll come back as soon as I can to examine them all, like I did for Sammy's camels. You really have to treat your sick animals every day for a month. Then you won't have to worry anymore.
شكرا السلام عليكم.
Hello, how are you?
Fine.
This is Syed Sanusi. He's an agronomic engineer, and he's the best date palm specialist in the entire oasis. Okay, good luck.
Maybe God created the desert so that man could appreciate the date trees, mused the author Paulo Coelho. There are 1,500,000 date palms in Baharia. Dates are the leading product of the oasis. Here, everyone believes that the date palm benefits from special divine grace, and they all take very good care of this legendary tree.
The date palm is like a human being. It's like a woman. Up until the age of about 45, she's fertile. Well, it's the same with the date palm. After 45, the female date palm no longer produces. And even if there is fertilization, the tree won't yield any fruit.
All the oases in the western desert are situated in low basins of limestone plateaus, between 100 and 130 meters below sea level. And in this geological configuration, the groundwater just gushes up. At first, this hot water that comes from deep within the earth flowed naturally. And then, as needs grew, other methods were needed to ensure the supply of water. An oasis is a natural environment structured by man, with a whole system of technical and social management of the resources.
In the Baharia oasis, there are 86 machine-dug wells and 243 natural wells. Until 1976, all the oasis had only natural wells, but constant pumping caused water levels to drop, and from that time on, they started using machines to drill wells.
It's not your garden variety dandelion that can go out and live in the Sahara, said Theodore Monod, a great connoisseur of the desert. And yet, in the oasis, the work of man has made some inroads into the desert. On the other hand, they've had to dig deeper and deeper to reach new water levels. Some investors are even trying to drill 1,200 meters into the subsoil. They dream of transforming these vast arid zones into fertile land, dreams that often last only a few seasons. The desert ground retains nothing. It has no memory, whereas for millennia, the land has been intensively worked in the same way. In all the North African oases, the fields are divided up in the same way. From small plots to fruit and palm tree plantations, everything is organized around the irrigation. And the organization of the water sharing remains an intangible rule of life. Tafoya has to irrigate regularly, twice a week in winter and every day in the heart of summer. It's painstaking work that no machine can do, and the tools they use haven't changed for centuries.
Every plot of land is about 3 by 3 meters, and I have quite a few plots. I have about 100 to irrigate on this side and about the same number on the other side of the road. Farming is a difficult job, but it's our profession, and it's been our family's profession for centuries. We never stop working, every day. But every job has its drawbacks. I'm used to it. I've always done it. And when you do your job well, you can hope for good results. As the proverb goes, every effort has its reward.
Meanwhile, Dr. Mansour continues working on the farms. Be it for treatment or artificial insemination, he is always on call. There is, however, one domestic animal that he treats less and less: the donkey. For thousands of years, the donkey was the main means of transportation for man and goods in the oasis. But today, due to globalization, Chinese motorbikes have become serious competitors. Even in the heart of the desert, life is changing. In fits and starts, progress is coming to the oasis. But in these islands of the blessed, there is still a pleasant tranquility. For the people of the sand, working the earth is still the basis of their lives. They are strongly attached to the rhythm of work imposed by the sun, to the earth that must be watered, to life that must be protected.
The desert surrounding us is vast and it protects us a little. There have been changes, but there are still a lot of people who preserve their customs and traditions. One day my father left for Cairo, and he couldn't stand the hustle and bustle. When he came back, he said something I liked a lot. He told me, if there's paradise on earth, it's the oasis. I couldn't live anywhere but in the oasis. And here, as the saying goes, I'm like a fish in water. And it's true. I couldn't live anywhere else.
In the land of the muezzin, the peal of church bells sets a different tone. At 4 in the morning, the monks assemble for prayers. 2 hours of psalms, chants, and litanies. The history of Christianity is closely linked to the history of Egypt. According to the Bible, the Holy Family took refuge here after the birth of Christ. So the Son of God spent the first years of his life on Egyptian soil. A few centuries later, the early Coptic Christians cite the Holy Family's flight into Egypt as proof that Christianity was born here. The fine points of doctrine aside, one thing is certain. Over time, thousands and thousands of monks have taken the vow to live here and consecrate their lives to meditation and prayer. Today, monastic life is attracting more and more candidates. And in light of their former lives, these men do not make the decision to enter the monastery lightly. Father Uil is one of the abbey's 120 monks. He's been here for 13 years, after leading a rather interesting secular life before.
I was born in Mansoura. I grew up there and I studied there, in a school of civil engineering. And after I got my engineering diploma, I worked for a few years in Argada and then El Guana. I worked for several different architectural firms. And then I decided to become a monk because I wanted to spend the rest of my life in God's presence. I wanted to live in a place like this. Here I'm completely happy. And I think it's the best decision I ever made in my life.
One doesn't go to the desert to escape, even if the spirit can find refuge here. The Christians of the Orient settled here in order to pray in total peace. Islam didn't exist yet, and monks were already retiring from the world in search of an ascetic life. Over more than 16 centuries, their roots have taken hold here in the Sete Desert. At first they were hermits, and then they formed communities. Now there are still 4 active Coptic monasteries in the valley of Wadi Natrun. For these desert monks, the isolation and living in caves like the early hermits belong to the distant past. Now they live in communities. Their cells are much more comfortable, but no outsider is allowed to enter them. They follow the rules of monastic life to the letter.
Monastic life follows 3 rules: poverty, obedience, and chastity. Poverty allows detachment from everything. Chastity fosters purity of body and spirit. Obedience has to be followed all through life. You have to leave all your decisions in the hands of the abbot. Obedience is without question the most difficult of the rules.
The daily life of the monks takes place behind these imposing walls. Walls meant to help in their spiritual quest, but also to protect them from the outside world. And yet their existence is not solely contemplative. Monasticism is based on 2 basic principles: prayer and work. Life in these monasteries is organized so as to be self-sufficient. Before becoming a monk, candidates have to prove themselves over several years. Novices wear a blue or brown robe for the first 2 years, and then a white one for a year or 2. It's a very strict hierarchy, and it's only after they have taken their final vows that they let their hair and beard grow. There are 120 monks in the convent of St. Pichoy, but there are at least 400 lay workers there as well. Some of them live here all year long, others for a few months at a time.
We give him the work because if he gets the work here, he gets money for his family, to feed his family, and he spends a good time in desert, in monastic life, because we let them pray, we let them confess, we let them share our life.
Fields of cereal, olive groves, fruit trees, beans, the monks and their employees have managed to raise crops on the threshold of the desert. Self-sufficiency on a grand scale. A monastery operates like a business with a variety of activities. It's more than a community. It's a world in itself with its own codes and organization. There are no taxes, but there's no individual gain either. Everything is for the collective good. They've been in this spot for more than 16 centuries. Yet these monks have come a long way since the year 390 AD. They're not afraid of progress, and their skills acquired before they enter the monastery are put to good use on new development projects. The combination of techniques and ancestral skills has allowed them to earn a certain reputation. The influence of the Christians of Egypt means an economic influence too. And on this point, the monks are actively involved.
Obviously, we make use of technology, cell phones and computers. A lot of monks use the internet. Almost all the monks have had higher education. Today we can master technology and not let it master us, and it's essential to understand the difference.
Even if Coptic monks have not lived like hermits for a long time now, the desert still figures strongly in their religious vocation. They make regular retreats here alone for a few days or weeks to meditate and carry on this tradition.
In the desert, the monk isolates himself and detaches himself from daily life. He lives only for God. Our spiritual fathers taught us that contemplation in the desert frees us from all material attachment so that we can deepen our spiritual relationship with God. Obviously, a person who can't adapt to the desert won't be able to bear this isolation. But on the whole, the desert encourages personal growth. Here, we are in peace.
The Wadi Natrun monks are a real success. When the monastery opens its doors to the public, it attracts an impressive crowd of faithful. The monks are seen as the cement of this religious community. Their continuous presence down through the centuries and their resistance to persecution are seen as a symbol of immortality. It's difficult to estimate the number of Copts. 7 million according to the Egyptian government, But religious authorities put the figure at 12 million. The figures are often a subject of controversy. But Egyptian Christians are attached to their particularities, and for them, coming to these monasteries is like making a pilgrimage. Undoubtedly, these Christian chants bring on a sort of Oriental blues, but the monks don't wring their hands in prayer, and they seem consistently cheerful.
A monk's life is not one of competition, but of encouragement. There is no competition between us. There is a collective spirit where everyone can develop his own spiritual life. Our community is part of this world, a part protected by the angels. Angelic life has no definition. It is a life where you feel at one with yourself, quite simply.
Even though it's arid and desolate, the desert has many faces. Sometimes man is tolerated here on the condition that he's willing to show humility before the harsh elements. An unavoidable expanse on the caravan route, this western desert is a hostile place, and yet it exerts an attraction, a sort of magnetism. It is a refuge for mystics and the contemplative in search of the pure. This landscape is also the ideal setting for adventurers in quest of boundless horizons. Nobody knows this man's name, but his nickname is well known. Fenuya is a desert lover with a particular fondness for the western desert. For more than 30 years, he has been crisscrossing the desert in a variety of ways. At first, he organized and ran rallies. Then his competitive spirit waned, but he still has a real fascination for these landscapes.
For the ancient Egyptians, the Great Sea of Sand began immediately after the last oasis. This marked the end of the kingdom of the living and the beginning of the kingdom of the dead. And between them, there was a dangerous no man's land called chaos, where you could find yourself trapped. And they were right to be wary, because in certain directions, it was uncrossable. The desert is both life and death. It reminds us of the fragility and the beauty of our humanity.
Heading out into the desert is always an adventure. You can't forget anything: gas, water, food, tools. But above all, you mustn't set out in just one vehicle. A breakdown in the middle of the desert can quickly turn into a serious problem.
This is a well-known Saharan ritual that gives the tire the same consistency as a camel's hoof. We deflate the tire, it gets wider, and there's more surface in contact with the ground. We deflate it to 800 grams of pressure.
The desert is a sort of solid ocean, and there are many similarities between the sea and the desert. The chain of dunes is like a series of rollers on the sea, and rather than driving, you feel more like you are navigating as you set a course to make your way across this sea of sand.
You have to consider the dune as something fluid, something that shifts, that moves, and that's why they give you a feeling of eternity. You see a frozen storm. Here we're on Gourd Abu Muharrak. the father of impassable dunes. Abu means father, but I prefer to say mother. It's prettier. It represents the mother, maternity, and Mother Ocean because it's vast like an ocean. So I'm bending the rules, but why not? It stretches over 550 kilometers, so it's the longest chain of dunes in Egypt, in the Sahara, and probably in the world. I never get tired of it. I like discovering it on foot, by camel, motorcycle, or car. Different pleasures, but equally profound. Being in the desert means choosing your route, studying the difficulties, and trying to evaluate them correctly.
Hundreds of kilometers to the south, a passage leads you through the waves of dunes to an amazing sight. When you cross the western desert with Fenouil, you discover areas that are as grandiose as they are mysterious. And we come upon a phenomenon that no one could have imagined finding here.
Here, we're in the only limestone cave in the Sahara. You can see enormous stalactites. The corresponding stalagmites have been buried under the sand for thousands of years. And this proves that the Sahara was once green. This cave was a mandatory stopover for caravans for two reasons. There was water in it, that was important, and because it's situated 15 kilometers from a passage where the camels can get through the dunes. A German explorer rediscovered it in 1873, but it didn't interest him. He didn't note its geographical location. Much later, in 1991, another German rediscovered the cave. But now, the water's gone.
Traveling the desert means confronting the unknown, looking for landmarks in the middle of emptiness, and knowing that the slightest undulation in the sand could turn out to be a trap. It calls for a great deal of knowledge to be able to negotiate the desert safely. One miscalculation, and the car stops short. In the second vehicle, Karim, the second driver, Rushdie, the mechanic, and Saeed, the cook, are bogged down. 3 times, 5 times a day, they have to help each other out of these sand traps.
Karim, tell us when you're okay. Okay, let's go. Karim studies sand. He's a great guy. He's always cool. Okay, enough compliments. When you're in the sand and the dunes, you need 2 vehicles because anyone can get into trouble. You can fool around when you're done, but not before. You never know what might happen.
Fenouil was certainly not predestined to become a desert specialist. He had a degree in philosophy and became a journalist. While working on a story in Algeria, he discovered the elegance and freedom of the shifting dunes. That was almost 40 years ago. And from that moment on, his love for the desert grew stronger and stronger.
Here you feel like you're at the beginning of the world. There's something magical about these rocks and the soft sand. If there wasn't any sand, we'd be driving over the rocks, but here you glide on the sand between the rocks that are getting closer and closer and forcing us a little off course. But they're so beautiful, you can't blame them. When it hits the rocks, the wind moves the dune in a different way. It digs into it. Like when you're at sea, you have to be careful near the reefs because of the whirlpools. Here, too, you can find dune whirlpools, and sometimes you find hollows that can be a little dangerous. When I discovered this place, it sounds a little pretentious to say discovered. It's simply that there was no logical reason for the nomads to pass this way. And when you see a place with no cairn, no stone markers, that means no one's come through. I came this way for the fun of it, and when I found this place, I called it the Halong Bay of the desert. All these rocks change the way the wind blows on the dunes. The dunes separate and keep drifting, showing how sand is fluid. It passes between the islets, like currents running between the rocks in Halong Bay. The sand continues on its course. This landscape is unique.
As soon as night falls, so does the temperature, and it's brutal. You have to set up camp well before sunset, make a fire, and let Saeed get to work with the gas burner.
Between friends, we talk about why we come here. We say that we must be a little crazy. In the old days, someone could love the desert, but it was also their livelihood. I'm talking about the caravans that crossed it. But if you want to abandon civilization and comfort in search of danger and thrills, as well as the love of nature, there's nothing rational about it. It's a passion, like for the ocean and the mountains. You accept the hardships, because it doesn't matter how you travel. Sooner or later, the vast desert is always going to give you problems. The Western Desert, it's my favorite, because it's the wildest. It's the largest expanse of sand. There are legends about it, but also stories of adventurers and explorers. It's also the most diverse desert that I know. The landscape often changes in Egypt's Western Desert.
Sometimes the wind and the sand give birth to strangely formed knolls, to dunes with perfect curves, or to beds of rocks sculpted like blades. You need a vast amount of knowledge of the desert, a dose of recklessness, and that famous touch of madness to brave such wild terrain. Even though there's no proper marker, this is the only way through. This gully has a drop of more than 120 meters.
Karim, I think you can shift down to third gear and then to second at the bottom. Here you have a typical trap. When you see a dune with a very steep slope, you have to watch out not to crash into the rocks. We've all made stupid mistakes in the desert. I'm the first to admit it. I came here without a clue. I survived learning little by little. But when you cross the dunes, you always have to be humble. You have to understand, think things out, evaluate.
Burning hot when the sun is at its zenith, freezing cold in the middle of the night, the desert is a land of extremes. What artist could have conjured up such incredible settings where the light completely changes the perspective, where pretentious little outcrops break the dune's flowing curve? In the desert, you're sure to find landscapes that are impressive, moving, or depressing, depending on the traveler's mood.
A lot of beautiful things have been written about the desert because it's so inspiring. But the story I like the most is by Honoré de Balzac, about an old soldier under Napoleon, telling the story of his Egyptian campaign to his grandchildren, who keep interrupting him, asking, "What was the desert like?" He looks for the right words and finally comes up with, "The desert is God before man." And you don't have to be a believer to have a feeling for transcendence. When you see the desert, you see a virgin land before man's done anything, either good or bad.
After 5 days of pure desert, this sign of life looms up like a mirage. This remote, forgotten citadel is the vestige of a time when life really existed in this place that's so lifeless today. What happened? Why did men construct this fortress, and why here, in the middle of nowhere?
This is the biggest fortress built during the Roman colonization around 2,000 years ago. The Romans occupied Egypt for 400 years, and this fortress was used to protect the caravans. There were major Roman garrisons here. The place was called Ain Dabadib, the Well of the Scorpion. It was abandoned 500 years ago because the wells dried up. But then water reappeared in Karga, which is now the largest oasis in Egypt. And this place stayed abandoned. It might have been the last place where Cambyses' army passed through. I say might, but scientists seem to agree. The last traces of the army were found here.
In 525 BC, Cambyses, the powerful king of Persia, after conquering most of Egypt, sent his army to the oasis of Siwa to subjugate the oracle of Amun. But then, a unique occurrence in history. That army of 50,000 men vanished.
For a long time, people thought it was a legend. But now, historians know that Cambyses' army was composed of 50,000 men, the largest army in the world at that time. Herodotus wrote that the army was buried in a terrible sandstorm. The idea is interesting for a movie. It was used in The English Patient. The more probable explanation is that the army made a navigational error and got lost, that they died of thirst because they never came back and they never arrived at Siwa. And as no trace of them was found, they must be buried under one of the enormous cathedral dunes in the Great Sea of Sand.
For more than a century, historians have been looking for traces of that army. And in November 2009, Italian archaeologists discovered vestiges of what might be part of Cambyses' famous army. 2,500 years later, the enigma of that disappearance might be solved. People have become interested in the desert fairly recently. As long as only caravans crossed it, nobody, or almost nobody, ventured off the camel routes. It was not until the beginning of the 20th century that the first explorers began to venture in, thanks to the automobile. And those scientific expeditions were hunting for the lost oasis, called Zerzura. That paradise on Earth contained a city sheltered in the heart of steep cliffs. And the myth of the lost oasis still preserves all its mystery.
We're on one of history's first roads for cars, built between 1925 and 1930 by the English and their Hindu workers, because the Egyptians didn't want to go out into the desert to break rocks. It was quickly abandoned because it was covered by sand. With a new road circling the oasis, this one's been forgotten. When it was reopened in 1986, no one had been on it for more than 30 years, and you felt like you were traveling towards a magical land, a lost oasis, where there were traces of civilization, cairns, but no cars. Everything had been erased by the wind. This is a beautiful barcan. This dune has three characteristics. It's the fastest moving dune in the world, it has a crescent shape, and its two tips advance. On the average, a barcan can move 5 to 12 meters a year. That's 75 meters a century. What's more, it can give birth. At the tip, a little pile of sand appears that then becomes another crescent that grows.
This apparently hostile land seems to breathe, as if the Sahara were a place that gives life to the mineral world. After days of traveling, after making a big loop from east to west in a multiform desert, Fenouil finally arrives at what he considers the most beautiful sight of all, the Great Sea of Sand. All of a sudden, infinity is within reach.
I never get tired of these landscapes. It's a strange feeling, like going back to the beginning of the world, like you're starting over. I've never met anyone who wasn't moved by the sight of these shifting dunes. Everyone is free to look for what he wants in the desert. I don't come looking for solitude. I'm very close to my family and friends. But when I come to the desert, I enjoy this total contrast. When I'm in the civilized world, I get the morning and evening papers and devour all the news. When I go back to the desert, I do without the news for a month. I come back and I ask, which old fools died? But I'm not being heartless. It's just that I get the feeling that the world hasn't changed much. There's always just as much misery, just as much happiness, as much beauty and ugliness, and I took advantage of the beauty and the peace of the desert, which cleansed my soul.
This man has managed to find his way in a place where, in fact, paths do not exist.
The desert makes me think of a mystic Tuareg song that ends with, "He who dies of immense love needs immense forgetfulness." Only passionate love, or the desert, could inspire a phrase like that.
New Zealand. This group of islands in the South Pacific is the remnant of a sunken prehistoric continent. We'll be crossing South Island. It's the largest and least populated, teeming with exuberant vegetation. Peter Geen used to be a farmer. He's traded in his tools for paintbrushes. He has set up his studio near some of the most stunning sights and travels the country to capture the light, settings, and impressions. Dave Downs spends a good deal of his time poking around the riverbeds of the Hokitika region, his practiced eye on the lookout for jade stones. This experienced jade hunter has a passion for these stones and hoards them like a treasure. Stewart Island off the south coast numbers 400 inhabitants. Farhana Ahmad is one of them. This young woman who talks with the birds was born in Kenya, grew up in England, and was an accountant before settling here in the roaring 40s.
I've traveled to a number of different places and lived in a number of different countries, and I just think it's a place of complete timeless beauty. It's a place that I'm really lucky to have found.
Aotearoa. In Maori, this means land of the long white cloud. This is the name the Maoris gave this unknown, uninhabited land when they came here from Polynesia about 800 years ago. After the early Maoris, it was a long time before other men reached this island far from anywhere. The first Europeans, the Dutch, arrived here less than 4 centuries ago. They named this country New Zealand after a maritime province of the Netherlands. This island, along with the Antarctic, is one of the last great territories discovered by man. This young land, with its short history, was preserved from human activity for a long time, which is why the wildlife in New Zealand is particularly rich, lush, and beautiful. Golden Bay. This is where Abel Tasman, the first European to land here, dropped anchor. There was also James Cook. With its 15,000 kilometers of coast, New Zealand is a land of mariners and sailing. Peter and his wife Carrie are out paddling on Golden Bay in the early light of dawn, but they're not doing it just for the exercise. Peter captures sensations. He seizes the different lights, reflections, and all the expressions of nature that he will rework later.
I take all the pictures I can, because it's a digital camera, and when I get home, I'll then put them onto my laptop and start whittling them down and refining until I finally see a photo that I think could make a good painting, and then and just watch it grow. The reason I like that scene is mainly because it's a rock. It's solitude, it represents solitude. It's solid, it represents age. It's, been in all weathers, and there's just something nice about it, how it just sits there, reflecting, and yeah, it's just nice and peaceful, and sort of, yeah, it's a bit how I feel sometimes. It's a fantastic place to go, yes. Yes, you can always go around there and be guaranteed a painting from a trip around there in the kayak, that's for sure. I try to change the mood in the painting. I think that's probably what I do from the photograph. And it's my interpretation of what that photograph is.
New Zealanders are very ecology-minded, and Peter and Carrie are good examples. Their garden is thriving. The earth is generous. The climate, ideal.
Mostly, probably about 90% of our food we grow ourselves. Hey girls. It's a great healthy lifestyle. It's a good way to eat food that hasn't travelled any distance. We grow it ourselves without the use of sprays. So yes, it's a good feeling to eat good, clean food in an environment where we grow it ourselves.
And it's all under control. Organic, yes, but all the plants have to toe the line. Nothing out of line in this bucolic setting laid out by Peter and Carrie. For a long time, they themselves were a producer of organic fruit and vegetables, first in Australia, then in New Zealand. It seems they've completely tamed nature here.
When you go to the supermarket, the food doesn't look like food anymore, not like the food that we used to, or our grandparents used to eat. It's hardly recognisable as food because there are so many ingredients in the food that I can't even pronounce. And it's a real paradox that we know more about food and nutrition than we've probably ever known in the world. And yet there's more sickness, there's more obesity and heart disease and cancer. And yeah, we wonder if it's not being caused by what people eat. That slow food revolution. It's grow the food as well as prepare it yourself. Sit down and enjoy it and honour the food that you eat. We prepare it as close as possible to Mother Nature has presented it to us.
Peter worked the land for 25 years. Then he put away his farming tools for good and took up the paintbrush. He transformed his hobby into a full-time activity. Peter regularly leaves his studio to head out on field trips. 2 or 3 days on the road in search of the most beautiful spots. And here he's certainly spoiled for choice.
Well, a field trip is basically information gathering. It's a way of getting out into the environment and living in the environment and smelling the environment and what have you, and absorbing the necessary ingredients to take back to the studio to work with. There's still a few spots out there yet to be discovered, but there's a lot of places that we have been, that's for sure. There's two blues out there today. You've got the warm blue in the sky and the cooler blue in the estuary. And yeah, I think two colours of blue like that in one image is really a real treat. And yeah, and they've got the contrast of the orange on the cliffs. And yeah, there's some lovely colour out there today.
New Zealand is a vast country, but you only need to go a few dozen kilometers to find yourself in a totally different landscape. From the sea to the mountains, the transition is quite abrupt.
It's very dry, isn't it? Mm.
And each time, the surprising settings take the traveler on a voyage through time.
It's in its raw state and it's very natural. The landscape can tell me a lot and I can get a lot of ideas and I can add that to other paintings that I do. It's just been left alone and it's happened over a long, long period of time, and if you leave it alone and let it go and do its own natural thing, it'll look beautiful one day.
The entire west coast of South Island gets heavy rains. Between downpours, the sky clears up, and the sun pours down into these valleys of the rainforest thick with tree ferns. Nature offers the painter a rich palette of greens. Peter's camping car serves as his second studio. And Peter and Carrie have been traveling like this ever since they met. The camping car even played an important role when they first met.
Well, that wasn't in New Zealand actually, that was in Australia. Carrie was cycling from Tasmania up to Queensland, and I was travelling on my own in a Volkswagen Combi, and we met, and suddenly the bike got sold and we started travelling in the Combi, and we've been together ever since. We've always worked together, we've always been self-employed, and we enjoy each other's company profusely, and yeah, we love each other very much. A bit of erosion up there though.
I think Peter needs a break so he can get into the environment, and I like to come with him. So yeah, he needs to get out, and I think he sees almost every time he goes on a field trip he comes back full of inspiration. He's got to get into a painting really quickly, so yeah, it's good for him.
I can't believe it. You see anything? No. We're looking for New Zealand paua, or abalone, but there doesn't seem to be much here today. We may have to trek down to the other end of the beach. Ah, luck. Terry?
The abalone is a strange marine gastropod that spends its life stuck fast to the rocks. The inner side of its ear-shaped shell is covered with beautiful and valuable nacre.
Peter, is that long enough?
But here, Peter is after its delicious flesh. Abalone are plentiful here on the west coast of New Zealand.
That should be enough. Turn it over and check the size. Yep.
And Peter's little escapades always finish in the same way, with the painter alone before his canvas, working doggedly for days and days to distill the images stored in his head.
A photo will only capture a certain amount of information that I require, and I'll further that, and that's the advantage of doing a field trip. So I bring the landscape to me. I enjoy being in the natural environment, and I certainly have a great appreciation for it, particularly the undisturbed natural environment, and by that I mean environments that haven't been modified by man. You know, I mean, a tree like this, for example, is living a pretty tough life, as you can see. You know, its faces into the wind, and it's getting a pretty hard time, and I think that's deserving of some sort of recognition, I suppose. So that's really why I paint a subject like this.
With Peter's high-definition landscapes, it's sometimes hard to tell the difference between reality and the painting. Peter has chosen to portray what is beautiful, naturally beautiful. And such is his love for his models that he always tends to sublimate these images of nature that he is so fond of.
I like to come on site and bring the painting back towards the very end of the painting process. It certainly helps put some truth and honesty into the painting. Sometimes it's quite difficult because the paintings are big and the easels are big, and I've got to lug all my equipment to the site, and if it's a long way away it's quite a mission, but sometimes the final touches that you see the most, so it is important.
Peter Geen is now a recognized artist in his country. But this regionalist painter, as he calls himself, is above all happy to have fulfilled his dream, to live for painting and to continue to take delight in the impressive variety of these landscapes. The west coast of South Island faces the Tasman Sea. the banks of clouds that form in the middle of the Pacific roll in from the northwest. The west coast is virgin territory, pioneer country. A 150 years ago, this hostile region, wild and practically uninhabited, was the scene of a sudden massive influx of migrants. When prospectors discovered huge nuggets of gold here in 1860, the news spread like wildfire. From one day to the next, tens of thousands of people from all over the world flocked to this west coast to try their luck. Towns popped up like mushrooms, with their saloons, hotels, brothels, and tradesfolk that followed in the wake of the prospectors. They even quickly built a dock in Hokitika for the many boats bringing in new arrivals. The California gold rush had already petered out, so New Zealand appeared as the new Far West. And so many came, all lured by dreams of riches. In a few years, the West Coast was transformed, ravaged, and a good number of valleys were leveled by the miners who laid waste to entire hillsides in their quest for the coveted gold. And as always, the fever eventually dropped, almost as abruptly as it had broken out. Now there are still a few active mines, but the fantastic nuggets weighing several kilos are a thing of the past. Gold no longer fires the imagination. However, there are still some people who search the rivers of the Hokitika region.
Well, if you don't care if you get wet, it doesn't matter. See, them rocks are slippery, aren't they? You've got to be really careful. The water's nice and clear, though. Grab that view, Al. You see how it breaks the water?
Today, Dave Downs has brought his grandchildren along with him. This young, attentive grandfather wants to share his quest with them.
Looking for Ponamu, greenstone. Just gets washed down on the hills and into the river. When it rains and it floods, it comes up real high. You could see along the banks how high it will get, and it turns it over like a washing machine. So you've got more chance of finding the stone once it's turned over. It's really good. When it's on the bank, it dries out and it just looks like the normal stones. But when it's wet in the river, it's a bit easier to find. Think so? No, there's a big chip. See that, Ray? Yep. That's syrup. Yeah, it's a tradition. Goes down through the generations of children. If we don't teach them the outdoors, they won't go the outdoors. Like TV, video games.
The region of Hokitika is the place in New Zealand to find jade. For the untrained eye, these thousands of stones all look alike, and the ordinary hiker could pass through here without noticing the rare stone. Dave, however, is always on the lookout.
No, look at that. Here. See it? Have a look. What do you think?
And Dave certainly has a sharp eye.
You see how it's grey-white? Hold it, doll. See it, Rat? Look at that. See it? Ah, look at that. Look at the green in that. We might make a meaty out of that, eh? What do you reckon?
Yep.
Feel how heavy that is. I'll hold that. Got it? Pretty heavy, eh?
Yeah.
Feel it? It's just luck. A lot of luck's involved. The more time you come, the more chance you got to find in the stone. And that's all it is. Luck and time.
Dave loves stones so much, he's surrounded his house with them. But the most surprising thing is out in his shed. This is where he keeps his treasure. 20 years of collecting jade stones. Stones he loves so much, he doesn't even cut them open to see how pure they are. He lets them keep their mystery. His whole fortune and history is contained in these piles of jade stones.
It's a passion. It's a passion. There's browns, greens. The browns are beautiful. These are very, very rare stones. You see the brown crust in those. This is a beautiful Arahura chip. Look at the colour in that. It's marvellous. When I first started, it was for the commercial side of it. I was going to make a lot of money on it. Then I cut a few. I've still got them. I haven't got the money for them. Something grabs you and draws you into the stone. It's not just a Mary thing. It's not just a mouldy thing. It's just the stone. Of course it's a treasure, isn't it? You've been on the river looking for treasures? Yeah, there's another one. So once you cut it, you just turn it into a rock. It's not Pounamu. It hasn't got the character. You have to go out, you have to get in the environment and feel the tanga, I think the Māori call it.
Jade has been present in this region since the dawn of time. As a result of geological transformations, jade deposits formed deep within the earth. When the southern Alps were formed by upthrust just inland of the west coast, the deposits of jade were lifted to the Earth's surface. Much later, the glaciers carried the stones towards the valleys and towards the sea. And when the glaciers began to melt, they deposited these stones in the riverbeds of the west coast. The first Maori to land on this island named it Te Wai Punamu, which means waters of greenstone, or land of jade. This green stone played an essential role in their life. They used it to make jewelry and weapons, and they considered this stone as a link with their ancestors. It had not only material value, but also great spiritual value. Since the arrival of the Maori, a great quantity of jade has been gathered from the rivers and along the beaches. Now, no one knows exactly how much is still left in the rivers. The deposits have been scattered to many different spots. But even today, the Maori have managed to preserve the traditional methods. The jade must always be collected by hand. Dave works in a dairy to feed his family. Milk is New Zealand's white gold. Jade cutting is not his profession, just a side job. And when Dave cuts jade, he works with stones that he buys from other collectors. just so he never has to touch his personal collection. And yet, here Dave is cutting the stone he has just found in the river. He has a good reason for making this exception today.
This is a gift for my grandson. It's a mere that the Maoris used to use for self-defence when they were first out here. Because the stone is so hard, you can get a fine shape to it and it becomes a good sharp weapon. This will be just for show.
Dave, who has Irish roots, has been a New Zealander for 2 generations. He's interested in the history of this jade that's so important for the Maori.
Let's go, Lono!
When he's not searching the riverbeds, Dave spends his free time with the Kiwis, one of Hokitika's 2 rugby teams.
Relax.
Rugby is a veritable social and cultural phenomenon here. And again, we find the mark of the Maori culture in the haka, the impressive warm-up routine made famous by the All Blacks. For Dave, rugby is like his stones, a fervent passion. He used to play himself. Now he's a trainer / physical therapist and all-round loudmouth for the Kiwis.
Jersey, you play for your club, your jersey. You put it all on the line. All these boys work all week out on the rugby field. That's their time out by themselves. That's the man stuff from when they're little. Yeah, we won 36-28. We should have got 50. We've still got a bit of work to do. But this is the derby. This is the main game of this round so far. They're the top team. We just took them out.
Dave is a perfect example of what they call here the West Coast spirit. A tough spirit, sometimes a bit rough around the edges, but as genuine as the region itself. Dave has his own secret hunting grounds, and he sometimes has to hike for hours to reach them. This quest for jade is not as obsessive as the gold fever that afflicted thousands of adventurers 150 years ago. But Dave does always feel the irresistible urge to follow the river all the way up to its source in search of that special, rare stone.
There's a piece of rubbish. No colour in it, but it's a bit of stone.
His passion for these stones seems boundless, and no bed of rocks, no matter how large, can dampen his enthusiasm.
This is the Kuaka, but the water runs under the loose rocks, and as you get up round the corner up there, the water's in there, and it must go under the ground and then down and out into the Arahura River. When it's in flood, it's way up on the banks. I found rocks down here, big brown ones, 20 pound, but that's after the flood. We might be a couple of days late, but you don't know. Doesn't matter, does it? Pounamu is a bonus, you know. Don't get me wrong, it's good to find the Pounamu. But, you know, look at it. It's a lovely day. What else would we be doing? You've got to get away from work. Yeah. It's lovely, peaceful.
Just getting to Stewart Island is already an adventure. Whether it's by boat or in the small airplane that makes the connection, the crossing to this region off the coast of South Island is a real expedition. The currents are strong and the ocean is rarely calm, and the winds are as free as the air. Stewart Island is so wild that the first ones to greet the visitor are the albatross. Do they come out of boredom, idle curiosity, or to see if there's some kind of snack for them? A bit of all three, probably. At 47 degrees south, Stewart Island is right in the heart of the roaring 40s. Nobody spends too much time here. Even the clouds seem to be in a hurry. Farhana Ahmad came to live in this wild paradise 14 years ago. She knows a good deal about the wildlife of Stewart Island. She knows the stories that come along with each different plant and tree.
This vine here is called supplejack, and you can see the top. It looks like asparagus, like a head of an asparagus. And Maori used to eat it. They used to break it and eat it, and it tastes like a green bean. And when they couldn't find running water, they used to cut stems of this, break it, and drink the sap. And as the vines became older, like this, Maori used to weave them and make fishing baskets out of them.
Farhana is 47 and has had a rather interesting life. She was born in Kenya. Her father was from India and her mother from the Seychelles. She studied business and geography in England and worked for about 10 years as an accountant in London. Then one day she turned her back on all that and decided to travel.
I came to New Zealand 16 and a half years ago, and I did a lot of hiking from the North Island, South Island, and in Stewart Island. And I spent quite a number of years walking by myself in the forest and just watching and listening. Living in New Zealand gives you the encouragement to learn and find out more. So I did a lot of my own research.
After several years of backpacking, Farhana decided to settle on Stewart Island. In fact, she couldn't go any further. Continuing southward, the next stop would have been the Antarctic.
This is what Stewart Island roughly looks like. It's our third largest island. This is the west coast and the southern side, and then the Neck Peninsula, Patterson Inlet. 93% of this island is conservation land. It's in wilderness, it's uninhabited. 5% of Stewart Island around here is Maori land. And Maori arrived in Stewart Island in the 13th century, but they haven't lived here all the time. 2% of Stewart Island, mainly through here, is land available for private ownership. And there's only 28 kilometers of road. There's 750 kilometers of fabulous coastline. It's an amazing place.
Stewart Island is about 65 kilometers by 40, with only 400 inhabitants. And it's not an easy island to get to know. From the air, it's possible to get a view if you can dodge the downpours and gusts of wind. Coming in from the sea, you're often faced with a rather uninviting coastline. The only way to penetrate this territory is to hike for days and days, being careful not to stray from the paths, for the forest is impenetrable. Here, the vegetation definitely has the upper hand. This vegetation even seems to be gaining ground, waves of branches and roots encroaching on the sea, and not the contrary. This primeval forest is a thick tangle where everything that wants to grow finds a way to thrive. By dint of reading and accumulating knowledge, Farhana has managed to become an expert on her adopted land. She has even made it her job and works as a guide for people who want to discover the region.
This is a beautiful example of a lichen, and a lichen is a plant that's made up of a fungus and an algae, and the fungus makes the structure and the algae helps to make the food, so they grow very, very slowly. You can find this lichen throughout New Zealand. It's very common, and we call it a sample of a foliose leafy lichen. Yeah.
It's hard not to get lost in this maze of vegetation, beaches, and paths. Farhana knows this island like the back of her hand, yet she feels as if she's learning something new every day.
This plant is called the muttonbird scrub, and it's very soft underneath. It's almost like leather. And the visitors used to write on the back of these leaves. They put a stamp, addressed them, and wrote a note. And the local postmaster would get these leaves, and he used to send them on. The softness of these leaves were favoured by both the Maori and the Europeans. When they went into the forest, they used this as toilet paper, and it worked very well. That's a tui, and the tui is a native New Zealand bird. It's got a beautiful range of songs. It's got 2 vocal cords.
And once again, the roaring 40s are playing their favorite symphony for wind instruments and percussion. For winds blowing in gusts, for winds whistling in the branches. For the squalls that whip up the sea as if urging the waves to play even louder. Stewart Island is an open-air theater where the elements are forever performing the same show, and they hardly ever take a day off. Quite a bizarre spot to live all year round. In summer, there are visitors that come to admire the natural beauty of the island. But in winter, it's another tune. After you've lived in the big cities of Europe, the one and only village of Stewart Island seems like a magical spot at first. Then you have to be able to make a life for yourself there. It seems that wasn't much of a problem for this former Londoner. Farhana's house is so small we can't even visit it. except from the outside.
This is my wilderness chateau. It's very enjoyable being inside, whether it's a 10-bedroom chateau or a 1-bedroom chateau like mine. When the wind is outside and the rain is outside, inside it's your castle and it's really nice and warm. It's just in here. Oh, yeah. Yes, comfort is in the mind. I've got everything I need for the moment. I can read books, I can visit friends, and I can enjoy the birds in my garden and the plants in my garden. And I have the best duvet that you can buy on the market. So, yeah, I'm warm, I'm happy, and I've got this wonderful forest around me. And I'm being kind to the environment.
Farhana has turned her back on what she calls the concrete jungle and the rat race, quoting the titles of 2 Bob Marley songs. Here, the jungle is vegetation, and the only racing we witness is that of the sun and the clouds in the sky.
There's some kiwi footprints here on the beach, and the kiwis will feed near the beach or in the forest. And this kiwi has been out early this morning, so we'll try and see if we can find one. A kiwi is a flightless bird. It's one of New Zealand's most ancient birds and our national icon.
Farhana can take us to places where nobody else goes. But even so, there are no guarantees of spotting every single animal. And this time, we didn't manage to see any kiwis. This wingless bird is mainly active at night and is very shy. But there's always some curiosity to catch one's interest. You'd imagine them more in Africa, Central America, or in the Amazon, but there are indeed parrots living in these lands far down in the southern hemisphere.
It's one of 3 big parrots in New Zealand. All of these parrots are unique to New Zealand, and the kaka is the forest parrot. This parrot is feeding on the nut from this native tree, which is called miro.
New Zealand's human history is rather brief, and that's surely why natural history is so important to New Zealanders. They have no castles or cathedrals to preserve, but they do have this rich nature to safeguard, and to which they link their history.
This is a rimu, a very young rimu. They take about 500 to 600 years to fully grow. And when Captain Cook and his men sailed around New Zealand's coasts, they used to take the young branches of rimu. They boiled it, added molasses and yeast, and made a beer to stop scurvy. But I don't think it worked.
On Stewart Island, even the birds have their papers. Every year, there are major banding operations organized for certain species, and birds that aren't endemic are not welcome.
Where are you? We are waiting. Ah, Robin, Robin.
Farhana is a walking encyclopedia of Stewart Island's wildlife. And she has another particularity. She talks to the birds.
Up here. Just there. Like they showed you at the academy. Come on, Robin. The robin likes us because we disturb the ground when we walk, so insects can easily be found. So we call them opportunistic feeders. And the robin is not related to the European robin, but it behaves in a similar way, and its song is very similar. When modern land mammals evolved in the world, they didn't evolve in New Zealand 35 million years ago. And it was only when the Polynesians started to come to New Zealand about 1,000 years ago, and later the Europeans over 200 years ago, that they brought predators for our wildlife. But for millions of years, this country remained without predators. So most of our birds are very friendly.
The privilege of living on Stewart Island also means accepting the drawbacks. A rather restricted social life and rather harsh climatic conditions. For Anna's choice was obvious.
I think the country that you belong to isn't necessarily the country that you were born in or the country that you were brought up in. It's a country that you choose for the things that you value in life. I love the outdoors, I love the natural environment, and for me, this means New Zealand is the right country for me.
Australia, a vast country with only 23 million inhabitants. Richard is going to be our guide as we visit the Buccaneer Islands, a region that is as inaccessible as it is hostile. In this harsh environment, there are men at work gathering pearl oysters. In the very heart of Australia, Dave and his family live on the edge of the Simpson Desert. Living conditions may be hard, but Dave has given his children the biggest sandbox in the world. Further north in Arnhem Land, on the land of their ancestors, Simon, Russell, and Otto live their lives according to the Aboriginal traditions, a life with no constraints except those imposed by nature.
Respect the land, you'll survive, you'll come back safely.
The Buccaneer archipelago is made up of countless islands and islets stretched out over 1,000 kilometers. They are practically uninhabited. There are the rare navigators that pass through, but apart from them, the only other people that venture into this liquid labyrinth are the pearl farmers.
This is the Grumman mallard. These are our transport vehicles for around this wilderness area. So we're in a place where there is no access. We are 3.5 hours from Darwin by mallard, or 2.5 days by sea from Darwin. So without these transporters, we can't achieve our wonderful productivity. It's essential for us.
This is where we met Richard McLean. He came to Western Australia a good 20 years ago. He started out as a diver on a pearling lugger, a physically demanding job that he did for more than 10 years.
It's beautiful. And it's kind of peaceful at the same time too. If you take the time to stop and relax and listen to it, every time you come here in different light or different weather or different time of year, there's always something different that catches you, catches your eye, catches your imagination. I find it very inspiring. Probably not many other places in the world are so uninhabited and untouched. We're very lucky. Make it back for breakfast.
Richard could never bring himself to leave this region. Now he manages all the pearl farms for Paspali, one of the world's leading pearl companies. The story of these pearl oysters begins off the coast 300 kilometers south of the Buccaneer Islands. The divers first have to gather the wild oysters that will allow them to cultivate pearls. Tony Cook is getting ready for another dive. 20 meters down, the water is 19 degrees Celsius. The visibility is mediocre, but no matter, Tony has to dive.
Our fishing season starts around April and runs for anywhere up to 2.5 to 3 months. We take a team of divers up to 48. Paspali will take down the coast on up to half a dozen different motherships. We tow the divers, we call them drift divers. Drift diving, we tow them along the bottom where their sole purpose of being down there is picking up the shell, the wild shell, and during the day the divers will spend up to 8 hours a day underwater using our devised tables to ensure that we have no decompression illness.
Not only do the divers have to find the oysters, but they also have to keep a sharp eye out for the many dangers. Sharks and deadly jellyfish, for example. Tony earns a good living with this work, but it's quite risky. A few years ago, while he was working for another company, Tony witnessed a tragic event that deeply affected him.
There is some big fish out here. We have had attacks in the past. Probably, as I remember in my time, we've probably had about half a dozen attacks and a fatality in '93, which was a mate of mine who got taken. The water was dirty, poor fizz, about less than a metre. And his dive buddy came up complaining of no air, got to the surface and the hose had been bitten in half. So he pulled the hose in with nothing on the end. About a week later we found his body in a shark that we caught. But yeah, it was pretty tragic for the whole industry and everyone involved. It's always in the back of your head, especially in dirty water when you're working zero visibility. I think it's like anything, once you've been doing it for so long, you just take it as part of your job.
Once the wild oysters have been gathered, they're brought on board the impressive boat lab, equipped with a sort of operating room. About 50 people live and work on board, 25 of them highly trained surgical technicians. This is a gold-lipped Pinctada maxima, more commonly known as the South Sea pearl oyster. As oysters go, it's huge and produces a brilliant nacre with a satin sheen. To produce pearls, they first have to gather wild oysters, then seed them in a top-secret operation that takes place behind this partition. Each oyster has to be delicately pried open in order to implant a nucleus, a small pellet of special limestone. The foreign body will remain inside for 2 years while the oyster coats it with nacre. Once the seeding is done, the whole crew is mobilized to put the oysters back into their natural habitat. Only now they're held in baskets so they don't drift off to the current. For the first few months after the operation, the oysters are closely monitored. Every day, Tony and the other divers have to keep a watchful eye on their precious oysters.
We describe it as being an underwater labourer. The work itself is strenuous. It's like pushing a wheelbarrow underwater. Imagine that. We're in 20 metres of water most of the time, which is 3 atmospheres of pressure. So you've got those extra pressures on your body while you're working. You're lifting and carrying things unnatural ways. Yeah, you do get worn out quite quick.
Like a nurse at a patient's bedside, Tony has to make sure that the gold-lipped Pinctada maxima are recovering from their operation. It's tedious work alone at the bottom of the sea, and one has to be in excellent physical shape to be able to operate in such conditions. For Tony, the love of adventure and the rush of adrenaline are his life's blood. No, you're not seeing things. Tony is really toying with a sea snake. But he has to be careful, for one bite from this snake could be deadly. Luckily, Tony's wetsuit is thick enough to protect him from the lethal fangs.
It's just a passion for diving and being on the ocean. Yeah, came up this way surfing and fishing, and ended up jumping on one of the pearl boats to start with when I was a young fellow, and just pursued it. Been with it for nearly 20 years, so yeah, I've never had a bad day.
We're about to leave the operations grounds that we're at Sandy Point, and then head up into the Buccaneer archipelago into Talbot Bay. It's going to be about a 16-hour run for us. We should be there probably tomorrow afternoon.
To get to Talbot Bay, our boat has to go north 300 kilometers, then round Cape Levesque, where it ventures into the labyrinth of the Buccaneer Islands.
There's thousands of islands, inlets, channels, great tides. It's uninhabited, and it's just a fantastic area. The early morning light and the late afternoon light is when you see it at its best. It can look very harsh in the midday sun, because it's a harsh environment. There's a lot of local knowledge required not only to safely navigate through these areas, because they're poorly charted, but it's a beautiful area. It's beauty in its ruggedness, I think.
In this maze of land and sea, we see a few scattered installations. These are the pearl oyster beds. After recovering from their operation, the oysters spend close to 2 years here. It's a breathtaking spot, and so isolated and remote that there's no pollution. Perfect for the oysters.
We're at Talbot Bay, in the centre or the heartland of the archipelago now. This is our Talbot Bay pearl farm. It's a floating pearl farm. 13 people live here. And look what's in here. Have a look at this. It's just an aquarium. It's fantastic. Bit of fishing to top the day off. Let's see how lucky we can be today. A lot of people, this is the reason they come to work here, so they can fish. It's more than a sport. It's a way of life for a lot of people fishing. Oh yeah! There's a fish! Hey, there's another one. Look, there's a croc coming in. Look at him. Very unusual for a croc to come in this close. You can jump clean into the boat without batting an eyelid. If you've ever gone on a jumping croc cruise like out of Darwin, it gives you one thing, you realise how high and how fast these crocs can jump. And you know, that's what everyone gets a bit sucked in about crocodiles, because they see them looking docile like that one is, just floating on the top of the water. But when he goes, you can see how fast he just comes in from out of nowhere. Past
10 metres from their normal depth.
Watch out.
Let him come in a bit. Oh, it's a cod. He's got the biggest one of the day so far.
Oh, it's a cod. It's a good cod too. He's quite a big croc, 3 metres or so. Croc, get off there. Yeah. Get off the edge of the boat.
He'll chomp you.
Come on.
There's a particular curiosity in this maze of channels that Richard wants to show us. The Australians call this phenomenon horizontal waterfalls.
Yeah, there's a lot of water trying to get in or out of these gaps, so it causes these eddies, whirlpools. It's a pretty, we're very lucky at the moment because it's almost slack water, but still there's this much turbulence. So you can imagine what it's like at flood tide. It's extremely dangerous. We wouldn't be coming through here in a flood tide. 24, 26 feet is the difference between high and low tide. And that amount of water coming through these tiny crevices and rock gorges and that, tremendous amount of energy, huge amount of water being moved. All that turbulence and water exchange also increases the amount of oxygen in the water for food life, for our pearl shell and for all other fish species.
In Vansittart Bay, a little further north, the pearl harvest has just gotten underway. For Richard and all his co-workers, this is a period of feverish activity. And now we'll finally get to see the fruit of all this effort. And they say it's never the same thing twice.
This shell now is probably 7 years old. It was 3 to 5 when it was fished on the Arnhem Land beach. It's had another 2 years grow out. And it's been cleaned more than 50 times in that 2-year period, carefully by our farm workers. And it was delivered to the ship last night, opened this morning, and there we have. Beautiful pearl. Let's go upstairs and see what's come out of the harvest today.
To produce these little shimmering pearls, a whole battery of techniques and equipment has been mobilized. But without the natural nursery of the Buccaneer Islands, would these little gems attain this superb quality?
That's a beautiful pearl. You can hardly see the shoulders of this pearl. You look through them. We're very, very pleased. This is going to be a good harvest. To see such promise, such nice colour, nice clean pearls, nice shapes, this is exciting.
Richard has to take his precious cargo to Darwin. We'll take advantage of the seaplane to leave this magical spot. But Richard will soon be back here in this territory so removed from civilization.
Could be easy to get away.
Receiving, Dave. Yeah, I've just picked up those boys. We're on our way back for a beer. Copy that. Seen about 20. And we're just on our way back to Mount Dare, which is at the top end of South Australia. We really are in the centre of Australia and on the western edge of the Simpson Desert. And this is just a sample of the great roads that we have around here. We're very isolated. 500k from Alice Springs, 1,300 kilometres from Adelaide. And Rock is a day's drive away, so we're sort of a long way from everywhere. We just get used to hundreds of kilometres when you drive.
Mount Dare Station, an unlikely settlement plopped down right on the edge of the Simpson Desert. It's one of those places where life makes a dogged stand. All around for 500 kilometers in any direction, there's nothing but sand and rocks. It looks like a scene out of Mad Max, but a lot less violent and a lot more laid back. Here in the middle of nowhere, but in the dead center of Australia, is where Dave has chosen to make his home along with his wife and children. He came here 7 years ago and took over a half-abandoned service station. Mount Dare Station is the only post for the brave souls venturing into the vast uninhabited and uninhabitable desert, where the temperature often gets up to 50 degrees Celsius. People never stay here long. They're just passing through.
Cooking breakfast 1 minute and then you're out fixing cars the next. Just then getting ready with the post, and some days can be flat out in here.
Dave is the only person you can count on if you get lost in this hostile environment. This spot does have the one natural resource that made it possible for Dave to settle here, a source of water. Everything else has to be brought in from the outside, and that means far away.
This is all the supplies we need to look after all the tourists that come through. And at this time of year, it's very busy, so as you can see, we've got quite a load on at the moment. Takes us about 7 hours in the truck. It's usually 2 nights in town. And yeah, then we get back here, unload it, rush off and go and do another job. You do have to plan well ahead, and if you forget something, well, it's weeks before you get it. And our vegetable supplier forgot our lettuces. No lettuces. That's it.
A round trip to the nearest store is a 1,000-kilometer expedition, half of it on god-awful tracks.
We don't really have a local trade. There are some cattle properties not too far away from here, but they're 70 kilometres nonetheless. That's over an hour's drive, so we don't often see the neighbours, and it's sometimes a special occasion when you do see them.
As for social life, aside from the passing travelers and the hired hand, Dave, his wife and children have only each other to talk to. And the kids can hardly invite friends over for their birthday parties. But the family has found a way of life that suits them just fine.
Here we got my wife Melissa and my 2 little angels. We've got the eldest one Charlotte and the little girl Crystal Ann. They love it. We've just come back from Alice Springs, where we've been to the Alice Springs show, so we've got the bubble machine and show bags and all sorts of stuff.
Ring Becky! Just enrolled Charlotte. She's 3.5 for next year. She does kindergarten. It'll be correspondence through Alice Springs, and the year after that, then it'll be over the internet, School of the Year. They can see their teacher through via the camera on the internet, and they can do music, they can do dancing, painting, anything they can learn is on the internet. And they've got a 99.9% attendance rate, So, and it's the biggest classroom in Australia.
Just closing your eyes.
It is throughout outback Queensland, Northern Territory, South Australia, Western Australia. So it is just huge.
Charlotte's class, which has about 50 pupils, is the biggest in the world. It extends over a territory almost the size of a continent.
We're going out to the airfield to go and meet the plane. The plane brings the mail in every Wednesday, and they take one of these, all their outgoing mail, and we collect our incoming mail.
My name's Reg, and I fly the mail plane for Chartier, based out of Alice Springs. It involves delivering mail to remote homesteads, communities around the centre of Australia. This company has the longest mail run in the world. There are mail runs that 3 hours flying in a straight line to get to the first stop.
Morning. Good. And I've been preoccupied and forgot to bring you a drink out, but you're quite welcome to come over to the pub and grab one if you want one.
Just the one?
Yeah, just the one, probably 2 kilos.
Yeah, no dramas.
Everyone looks forward to mail day, and we'll sit around the table and divvy out all of the mail and work out who's been ordering the most things.
We have probably 9 mail runs on our books that go as far as West Australia, South Australia, and into northern Queensland. And it can take you all day, a good 8.5, 9 hours of flying to complete a mail run. And that's a pretty big day.
These postmen of the desert are the spiritual heirs of the early pioneering pilots. In spite of the long hours, the solitude, and the difficult conditions, they still nourish the dreams of many an Australian youth.
It's remote area flying. You're constantly over featureless terrain. It's pretty hard navigating out here. We rely on a GPS unit to get us from point A to point B. In the event that you do have an engine problem, we generally just pick a good place to put it down, and we've got supplies on board to last us at least 3 or 4 days, water and food, and we've got radios on board to attract the rescue crew if we need to. I'm quite fond of the red dirt, the Simpson Desert, the Tanami Desert. It's quite it's comforting. It's very interesting.
We've got to put the big wheels on, mate. We've got to go out in the desert for a couple of days, so I'm going to slot these on. This car's purpose is primarily to be a recovery vehicle. It goes out to do tows, pull people out of bogs, repairs, anything that needs doing around here. And I'm going to take my little girl away with me this time. Yeah, you gonna stay in the swag? Yes. All right. See ya. See you in a few days. Bye. I'll get in a minute. Ready for big trip? The kids really enjoy growing up out here. I just think it's a great environment for them. Charlotte really loves it. She loves camping. Really loves camping, sleeping in the swag and stuff, looking out at the stars through the open swag. Loves it.
"4 hours on the road, and the landscape is still the same. Dave doesn't get tired of it. He chose to live here in the company of these huge sand dunes.
Just being able to live and work in country like this is just special. You know, you don't want to be battling your way through traffic. I'd rather battle my way through sand dunes, you know. Yeah, we're going to camp just here, Charlotte. This would be a good place for the camping. Yep. And to get... there you go. Get the camping stuff out now? Yeah? Oh. We're at Perny Bore, which is 65 kilometres to the east of Dalhousie Springs. And as the name depicts, Perny Bore, it is a man-made bore that has been turned into a wetland. They were looking for oil and yeah, all that came out of the ground was near boiling water. So they said, don't need this, and off they went, leaving it flowing at, you know, so many thousands of litres a second. You know, it was just amazing, the water that was coming out. It would have filled these swales here before it was capped and restricted in its flow to just keep it to a moderate flow to maintain the wildlife that had become dependent on it. To raise kids out here has been a great privilege. Just this morning, Charlotte gets out of bed and says, come on, Dad, let's go and find some camels. You know, how many other kids are going to get out of bed and say that in the morning? This is Australia's largest sand pit. She plays out here, you know, like any other kid plays in their backyard, but I just think the scenery around here is just a little bit more special than the average backyard.
Okay. My scissors losing, Dad.
Kiss.
Oh, Dad, you know the sand pit.
Yeah, it's a big sand pit, isn't it? Can you see how they happen, all these little waves? Yeah. Right? They're pretty, aren't they? That's the wind that makes those. And the wind makes one little wave like this, right? And then eventually, this little wave will be as big as this sand dune. Because all these big sand dunes start off as little waves.
Star's gone.
Where are the stars gone?
Died in the sky.
Oh, okay. And where's the moon? The moon's still over there, is it? What's that? Oh, righto.
Inside the circle, a fire. It's really hot. Hey, look, a spider. He's looking for his mum. He can't find her anywhere. I nearly touch him. He might hurt. Spider, just keep going to your mum.
When you're out in the Simpson Desert, you've got 300 kilometres of sand dunes, no habitation for 500 kilometres between Mount Deer and Birdsville. And it's the vastness that is out here, it's just undescribable. It's really something that you have to see to to feel, I think. It's God's own country, you know. It's the colours around here, the beautiful rich reds are just fabulous. I love it. 6.5 years I wouldn't be here if I didn't like it. It's hard work, no doubt, but yeah, it's a great environment. It's peaceful. I just think it's great.
Arnhem Land is in the north of Australia. This vast preserved territory is a world of its own, like a state within a state. The entire territory belongs to the Aboriginal Australians, and any Australians who are not Aborigines have to get a permit to travel in this special land. In this breathtaking landscape, humanity's oldest civilization lives in harmony with the environment. For more than 40,000 years, the same people have been living on the same land here. At present, there are no more than 15,000 Aborigines living on a territory of close to 100,000 square kilometers.
My old people, ancestors, walked this country from thousands of years. And they left the old track here. This is tough country. You have to have a lot of knowledge to survive on this country. My father taught me how to live on country, and he learned from my grandfather. The knowledge has been passed on to this country.
In the heart of this peaceful landscape, we meet Otto Bulmania. He's a clan chief. According to tradition, each clan lives on its own territory and moves around according to the seasons. Before, when Otto's father or grandfather would roam with the family, they could easily cover more than 400 kilometers on foot on their clan's territory.
And I'm the traditional landowner of this country here, as you can see. Yeah, this is all my country, but you know, my great-grandfather and my father used to live on this country and do, you know, hunting and gathering around this area here. And now my father and grandfather gone. I am the traditional owner. I have to teach my kids to look after this country. We have like plenty, you know, billabongs, river, we go out and, you know, catch fish, feeding our family. Sometimes we go up on the escarpment here and do like kangaroo fire drive, and we, you know, catch kangaroo, and you know, sometimes we go out and do shopping in town, you know, like basic food that we get them, flour, tea, sugar, and we come back and stay in the bush.
Otto spends a lot of time roaming out in the bush, hunting or passing the traditional lore on to the younger members of his family. Here he's out with Russell, one of his nephews. In the 1920s, white farmers introduced water buffalo to northern Australia, and they have adapted very well. Too well, in fact. They've thrived so well that they've become quite harmful to the environment. Their hooves do a lot of damage to this fragile land, so their population has to be strictly limited.
Why?
This bull is really injured and it's really dangerous. It's on a scrub here somewhere, but You have to be careful.
There's no hunting season for the Aborigines. They hunt to live all year round according to their needs.
We eat a lot of bush meat. That's how we grow up here, and that's how we get like buffalo meat and kangaroo and bush turkey and all that. And there's a buffalo here, so I got them already. I think I might have a look what sort of meat I need, and I'll get it out as soon as I get it out. And I think that's our bush food. Sometimes we go out to the billabong. We had a lot of lilies in the billabong, but now it's all gone from the pig and buffalo. So we have to get rid of them all the time sometimes. Keep the number down and keep them out from the good place.
Living off the land also means protecting and taking care of it. It's a family affair, and each member has to do their part. Russell and his little brother Simon have gone out into the bush. They've been camping here for 5 days now. They call this a walkabout, a period of roaming without any specific destination.
The land, it'll take my breath away always. When I'm out in bush, it's really strong culture, and the way we sit around the campfire light, and yeah, I like it out here, and it's really beautiful, and the way you can hear the water, and it's really, really quiet, nice and quiet. And from where I'm sitting down here, I'll go to bed, and if I'm looking at the sky, I can see all them stars, a million stars all over. It's beautiful.
A walkabout can last a few days or a few weeks. It depends on how the spirit moves them. They take their time to camp, hunt, and simply enjoy the landscapes. This is the normal life of the Aborigines.
You know, watch out for crocodiles in this water, for sharks. Some fish, yabbies, stingray, and lots of sharks in this water. Bob. Bob. This is my mother country, you know. I used to live here with my grandfather, but he passed away a long time ago. Maybe 1 year back or something. I used to saw him spear a kangaroo on his country. He used to spear a wallaby with little wallaby. He used to bring back that little wallaby to me, and I grow him up. Oh, lots of people don't like that. They don't have the land. Just good life for us in this place. We like this place.
Bushfires raging out of control can be devastating for these parched lands. For ages, the ancestors of Russell and Otto have been using fire to fight fire, to avoid the extreme ravages it can cause.
It's fire season, and we're gonna burn the whole Arnhem Land. So everyone's lighting fire now in every art stations, and people live in hunting area. They all burn all that stuff. So it's fire season.
Some area we live in for long, 2-3 years, fuel load, we get big problem like big fire, and you can see big black scorch mark right on the top. And for this sort of fire, it's a cool fire. And when we burn like this, a few days time, all the reshoot grass will come back, and then wallaby will come back, big buffalo will come back, wild cattle, and we can, spot them in a good place. It's very old system, like it's been from the very beginning, since our ancestors' time. They've been, putting the fire so that our ancestors warming themselves and feeding from fire. So it's really important, like fire gives us everything.
Russell's family appears out of the smoke. No GPS, no compass. The Aborigines can drive for hours way out in the bush and find exactly what they're looking for. They've dropped in to spend the evening with Russell, which means getting dinner for 10 extra people. But that doesn't seem to worry Russell. While Russell goes off hunting, Otto makes ready for the evening's festivities.
This is woolly bark, and I can listen that is bit hollow here. So there must be good ditch. This one.
The didgeridoo is the musical instrument of Arnhem Land. Everyone knows how to play it around here. This instrument plays a vital role in the Aboriginal culture. They use it for their ceremonies, as well as for an evening of just singing around the campfire. To make a good didgeridoo, the recipe is quite simple. You just have to carefully select a tree trunk that's been perfectly hollowed out by termites.
And I got a lot of family, just came up for visit. So I think I need to get a lot of meat a little bit and take it back, and we'll cook them around. And I think we'll sit around the campfire Saturday night out. That's a family night to enjoy eating and have fun and talking each other. And I think we're gonna have a big feed and wash our hands, and I think go to bed.
Hunting and gathering are two cornerstones of the Aboriginal culture, a way to stay in touch with the land.
Our land, it's really like, it's all about culture too, and like ceremony and stuff. And we don't want to damage any of our land, because we like living like this. And we like collecting all the bush food, and you can feel the everything that's got in the earth. Dắt này vào. Đây đẹp. Cái đầu.
In the Aborigine tradition, these are called song lines, litanies chanted in a language no one can understand, but they are essential. The Aborigines say that it's the language of animals. One song line will describe the course of a river and all the wildlife that lives there. Another will retrace the limits of a specific territory and the animals that inhabit it. Each one of these songs is an element of the Aborigines' history and describes a piece of territory. The songlines are, in fact, the proof of ownership of a family clan, something like an official land deed, and the totality of these songlines form a sort of land registry plan.
This is like my grandfather's wet season camping area. During floodwater, he used to come and camp here for black wallaroo, for hunting kangaroo. There's no any car track, pretty rough country. It's a middle of the nowhere, and you can find them this sort of painting around this everywhere.
All these oral and pictorial traditions go back to the dawn of time. They're a way of transmitting information, and even though they're not written, they're just as precise. For Otto and all the Aboriginal Australians, the history of their people is made up of a succession of personal anecdotes.
If I'm walking on other man's country, I don't tell the story because I don't speak the language. New people always sit quiet when it's entering other man's property, and always sit quiet because you don't know what's the story behind you. But if you living on your country, you can tell them big mob story. You can tell them about, oh, let's go and hunting there, or let's have ceremony up here, and all the family, like country, make us talk, and it's there alive. It's watching us. If we make one mistake, we get sick because all people's spirit are watching us, and if we can't do proper way by respecting the land, we get sick, fall from rock or big ironwood tree, goes through our feet, and there's a lot of dangerous part. So respect the land, you'll survive, you'll come back safely.
The Aboriginal people of Australia have managed to survive much longer than any other civilization on Earth. And the key to such longevity surely lies in the great respect that they show towards their land and the creatures that live there.